Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session. And hello, Pattie. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to chat with you about your work for the next 25 minutes. Pattie, your work focuses on the intersection between well-being and technology, inspired by neuroscience and psychology. And most notably, you and your team have developed various very cool wearable devices that aim to integrate into people's everyday lives. For example, just a few examples to name, glasses that prompt people to be more attentive, or scent dispensers that activate based on the user's arousal level to improve memory, muscle tone sensors that detect our sleep onset, just to name a few. And much of your recent research has focused on augmented cognition, which is our topic today. So what do you see as the most exciting research in this space? And how do you think this will or already is informing the creation of new technologies and solutions?
Thank you, Miri. Today's commercially available well-being technologies and products are primarily focused on monitoring aspects of health and well-being. We have, of course, fitness monitors, maybe heart rate and EDA monitors, sleep trackers, mood tracking apps, and so on. But I'm actually interested in going beyond that and developing products and services that do more than just monitoring and maybe diagnosing issues as well, but that can intervene and can help an individual with whatever issues they are struggling with. Basically, the question that we are asking in my group is, can we create wearables and apps that help people with self-development and that help people change in ways that they want to change? I think all of us want to change and grow in some areas. We may want to develop better habits, improve our ability to focus, maybe learn more effectively, or become better communicators, be less controlled by our emotions, become more rational decision makers, be more creative at times. And the current solutions that people have for self-help and self-development and growth are far from perfect. Today's solutions primarily consist of maybe self-help books or classes or videos. You can go see a coach or a therapist. You can resort to chemical solutions, to drugs. And all of these solutions for sort of helping ourselves with these skills are expensive typically and far from perfect. They have side effects, they are less accessible, and so on. I believe that mobile and wearable devices are very well positioned to not just monitor and track our well-being, but also intervene in the moment to help people change. And that has been the focus of my research. We try to build systems that sense a person's state and also intervene in the moment to help them with change or growth.
Fascinating. So speaking of these interventions and just in the moment, let's dig a little bit into sleep, which I know is one of your main areas of work. And I know you see that also as a very underexplored space. So most startups that we see in this field today focus on either increasing sleep quality or increasing sleep duration. Your work goes further and deeper. You have studied what you call targeted dream incubation, as well as extending the hypnagogic phase before sleep as an opportunity specifically to enhance creativity. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what potential do you see for technology in the space of dreaming and sleeping in general?
Sure. There is a lot of fascinating research being done in the area of sleep and dreams by neuroscientists and psychologists. And for a long time now, they have been looking at issues such as how we can maybe help people with addiction, with PTSD, with mood problems, with memory consolidation and learning, with improving creativity, and so on during sleep. But these studies so far have been confined to lab settings and special sleep labs. And typically the studies that can be done are very limited because they are very expensive. They require one of these special sleep lab rooms, as well as expensive equipment such as polysomnography machine, maybe a scent or sound delivery machine that can be controlled very precisely. Of course, you need a bed there for the person to sleep in. You need a live person typically to monitor the sleeping subject and maybe intervene at particular times of the sleep cycle. These studies are also limited in that people, of course, don't sleep very well when they're sleeping in a strange sleep lab with all that technology around them and strapped to their body. So instead, we have started by developing compact and cheap devices that can enable home-based sleep studies and new home-based applications. Our devices basically open up new opportunities for research studies that can be done at larger scales in the wild, in people's homes at night. But I think they also will lead to novel end consumer products and services that can help people with home-based sleep interventions. For example, we are experimenting with dream inception and recording. We are experimenting with systems that can help people with sleep onset, reducing time for sleep onset, improving sleep quality by issuing interventions, for example, sound, scent and temperature interventions and more. And also we are looking at new opportunities for targeted memory reactivation, which is a fascinating technique that has been proven in lab studies that can help people with learning and with memory consolidation and improving memory recall. And last, I should say, we're experimenting with the dream incubation work that you mentioned, the Dormio system, which received a lot of press lately.
That's wonderful. So I want to get a little bit into the innovation process and journey in a minute. But before that, you often speak of your work as part of your work involving what you call critical conversations. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, what are the possible, perhaps unintended consequences of augmenting our cognition? Mm-hmm. How can we address these consequences starting now as we're building the future?
Yeah. So I think all of us engineers and inventors and technologists have learned a big lesson in the last 10 years that we need to think critically about the ethical implications of the technologies that we develop from the start, from the moment that we invent these technologies. We try to do so in our work. We always try to design with target users, together with target users. And we strive to enable people rather than sort of enforcing things. We want to teach them certain skills. We want these new systems and services that we offer to ultimately teach people certain skills rather than making them dependent on the technology and maybe less good at that particular skill. We care about privacy of data, and we try to keep data whenever possible, for example, local, and do processing locally as opposed to in the cloud to ensure that data is kept or that there's increased protections for privacy.
Wonderful. So looking at other aspects of the innovation journey, other than obviously ethical considerations, can you tell us a little bit about the process that you and your team go through in the lab as you kind of turn ideas into technologies, maybe using an example. How do you decide whether an idea is worthy of further development? When do you begin taking into consideration, for example, the user's experience and how it can be incorporated in the wild, as you call it? Product design. Is there an example of a project that you can kind of walk us through and how you go about it?
Yeah, sure. Usually the process starts with inspiration that comes typically from maybe reading about a certain phenomenon in the neuroscience or psychology literature. I mentioned earlier that there's all sorts of fascinating things that have been reported in the literature, but typically they have been very limited to lab settings. Take, for example, hypnagogia, the concept of hypnagogia, which is a stage of sleep that happens at the onset of the sleep cycle when people are just falling asleep and they actually have dreams that are very much like REM dreams, but they're not completely asleep, so people can still listen and talk when they are in that particular state. So actually, you may be familiar with this concept of hypnagogia because artists and scientists such as Dali or scientists such as Edison and Tesla and others have used this stage of sleep very effectively as a way to think more creatively about problems that they care about or topics that they care about. They would do so typically by napping with a heavy object in their hand. And the moment they enter this hypnagogic phase, basically the heavy object would drop, waking them up. And at that moment, they would force themselves to think about a particular issue or problem that they were trying to have more creative thoughts around. So several of the inventions of some of these scientists and artworks from some of these artists have been credited with sort of ideas that came up in that stage of hypnagogia, where people can do much more divergent or more creative thinking. And of course, that technique of sleeping with a ball in your hand or a heavy object in your hand is not very accurate or precise and is not necessarily that easy to master. So we decided to create a simple glove that measures when you enter that particular sleep stage, and an app on the phone that at the right moment will play a prompt and will remind you what it is that you have to think about. So effectively, at the right moment, this app starts talking to you and tells you, remember to think about blah, 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 the prompt that you have previously recorded. And that will basically, as we have shown in experiments, will tend to incept that theme or that concept in your micro dreams that happen in that stage of sleep. And then we wake the person up and ask them to report on their dream and record what they verbally report, basically. So the system helps with both more accurate and more reliable inception of the dream theme, as well as the recording of the dream. Once we had this idea, we quickly prototyped a sensor and an app to experiment with this concept. And that is typically the process that we follow. We do a lot of rapid prototyping and iterative prototyping, doing a lot of small experiments, pilot experiments to learn from, and that eventually leads to a more reliable design of the technology, as well as a major study or a study with a lot more subjects that is very controlled and carefully designed and so on. So we did that for the Dormio system, for example, and just recently published our whole technique basically for inception of these micro dreams in the Journal of Consciousness and Cognition.
And what's the next step for Dormio?
Yes. Well, typically the Media Lab, actually, a lot of our students are very entrepreneurial. We even have sort of a very, very early stage venture fund that helps our students just in the 6 months from the time when they graduate, probably with not all that much money in their bank account, to sort of thinking about how their thesis work could be turned into a business. And so a lot of our students start companies, and other technologies may be licensed to larger existing companies.
Very exciting. Your team obviously is very interdisciplinary. You have people from neuroscience, physiology, engineers, people from behavioral science, which is very much, we very much enjoy, very much believe in this approach to innovation in the well-being tech space. How do you get everyone to speak the same language? How can you put your finger on sort of what are the key ingredients for a successful team and a successful project?
Yeah, I think really one of the magic ingredients of all of the Media Lab's research, and especially in my group, is that we tend to bring different disciplines together. And I believe that it is a lot easier to innovate when you do so. These days in academia, a lot of disciplines are very sort of focused, internally focused, and it's actually pretty easy when you bring two things together that have never been sort of or rarely been brought together to come up with innovative ideas. But you're right that it is a challenge to find people that can actually talk to each other and work together. And the way we deal with that is that I typically select for researchers to join my group who have a lot of depth in one area, so they are experts in an area, but they also have significant interest and knowledge or skills in another area. So I typically try to find people that sort of straddle disciplines, but they need to, of course, have a lot of depth in at least one discipline. But in my group, I have people who are designers as well as psychologists or neuroscientists and engineers in one and the same person.
So they already come in knowing how to speak the other person's language, at least one other person's language, hopefully.
Biologists who are machine learning experts and so on. And I have to say that we select for people who like being in an interdisciplinary environment and who have an open attitude and a very playful attitude and an attitude where they want to learn from colleagues. So typically the people that we select like to take risks, like to, I try to find people who are very constructive in their feedback and who see opportunities and are not scared to try something crazy and different. People who actually don't take themselves too seriously. Yeah.
I'm taking notes here. These are very important, I think, very important criteria. Great. Well, of course, we have to give, a bit of attention to that little virus which turned our worlds upside down in the last year, and consequently, obviously, brought the topic of well-being and related innovation into public interest. Has this current climate in any way inspired you to change any course of your research or focus on ideas that address kind of the new set of challenges in our lives, maybe even thinking differently about existing work that's going on in the lab?
Yes, definitely. Before COVID, most of the work in my group was on wearable devices. But of course, all research with human subjects that happened in person stopped at one point. So that limited to a very large extent the work that we could do and the experiments that we could do. So we have, for the last 8 months or so, also started some new projects that are more software oriented. Occasionally, they still use some hardware as well that we can ship to people. But a lot of the work that we are doing these days is also pure software. We are looking at new application areas. For example, how can people connect at a distance in different ways, in ways that promote more trust and empathy and more of a connection in these remote interactions. That's just one area that we've been looking at, but also other areas like how can we help people with confident speaking, for example, in these online conversations. We've been looking at fascinating, fun things like using the technology behind deep fakes, synthetic AI, to change a person's image of themselves on the screen to be more confident. And we are experimenting with ideas of whether that actually helps people with confident speaking when we alter their self-image in real time, things of that sort.
Well, that lends very, very well to, I guess, what will be my last question since we're running out of time, but I know that we can move into the Q&A part in a bit. So I guess, yeah, let's wrap up looking ahead towards the next 5 or 10 years, since you're very much already a future forward-looking researcher. And looking into the real world, obviously, what do you see as the next frontiers in technology for humans and well-being?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to wrap up by saying that I think we have an opportunity to create new consumer technologies and experiences and services that allow people or that enable people to help themselves and assist them with some of these skills that are really essential for leading a successful life. Things such as motivation and finding motivation, or grit, having grit, confidence, self-confidence, being able to think creatively, being able to control our attention more, or develop good habits, or maybe keep our emotions in control. I think that there's wonderful opportunities actually to make a difference in all of these areas with these new types of technologies that we are experimenting with in the lab. And I believe that they ultimately will make mental health and well-being more accessible to everyone and potentially also more effective.
Amen to that. Wouldn't that be wonderful to be able to have all these tools to help us in the future lead more successful and meaningful lives. Pattie, thank you so much for this mind-opening conversation.